Today's podcast of Hellbent for Horror is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Hellbent for Horror. Audible has over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hi, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror. I'm S.A. Bradley, and I'm a lifelong movie lover, but my heart belongs to horror. But my biggest thrill is really getting to talk to people about this stuff. So today, for me, is a real treat. What we have here is our first, and hopefully first of many, Wretched Round Tables. And this is going to be where we talk to fans, listeners, and they give me their passions. So we have 4 listeners who have kind of crossed over into the audio version of the Upside Down and joined us on this side of the cave. And I want to give you a little bit of information about them, or at least introduce them. Joining us today is Dan Strauss, who is a listener in Chicago. We also have Doug Lipski, who's a listener in New Jersey. We also have on the podcast listener Kris Zimmerman from Madison, Wisconsin, and also Timothy Gruscinski from Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Hey, good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Excellent. So I want to give each of you a little bit of time to talk about yourself. So Dan, since you're the Chicago guy, you're a software engineer who, as you said in your own words, you've been spending the last 3 years making up for a lifetime of horror ignorance. You're a fan of the over-the-top gory movies like Peter Jackson's Dead Alive. So give me a little bit of information about your discovery back into horror. It sounds like you hadn't been there for a while.
Yeah, I grew up in the 90s, just saw horror here and there, like The Ring and The Haunting, House on Haunted Hill, nothing too great. But then a few years ago, I decided for Halloween I was just going to dive in, watch a ton of horror movies, and after Halloween was over, I just kept going. I've been watching horror nonstop since then, pretty much.
So what got you interested? It sounds like there was one thing that just kind of tweaked you.
There was a post on a message board. Someone just said, hey, I'm watching these horror movies. I'm going to review them and list them as I watch them. And I went in there, I read it. Some of them sounded interesting, so I checked them out. And yeah, I was hooked.
Excellent. So for you guys, I'm probably going to come back and talk about this. One of the things that Dan and I have in common, for better or for worse, is he's a completist. So he ended up watching all 9 Hellraiser films over one weekend, whether they were good or not, just to say he could get through them. And I think we've all felt his pain. I certainly did with that one. But there's also more to the kind of things that Doug or Dan loves to watch. So what I want to do now, though, is talk to Doug real quick as well. So Doug is in New Jersey. He's a part owner and contributor to the website Echo Base, and he's been a lifelong fan of movies. And his particular favorites are the sci-fi and horror genres. So what's Echo Base, first off?
Well, Echo Base is a site a couple of friends and I started to create like a place where people can just go and geek out on what they love and kind of hopefully be a positive place for geek culture and just writing about movies or TV or books or whatever you're into and just being into that and not about being negative all the time and being down on everything. So we started that about a year and a half ago, and it's been going pretty strong. So it's been a fun experiment for me just to have a daily website to run. So. And I get to write a lot. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I have to say, I never thought the day would come when the geeks kind of inherited the earth. I mean, we're actually out of the closet now. It's really insane that there is an entire generation that's like, oh, yeah, no problem. Superhero movies. I saw a 45-year-old woman or so walking with a backpack that was Captain America's shield. And I was like, oh, my God, I can't believe this. I don't even want to tell you what would have happened in 1965 if you did that at that point. But
that's fantastic.
So you also mentioned, I'll probably get back to this too, I don't want to take up too much time, but sci-fi and horror genres. I have a friend who says that there is no such thing as the science fiction genre, that it's merely a location. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I've heard that before. I've heard that thought before, and I don't disagree with that. I just like the moniker. I don't mind calling it. I don't mind having a label for it. But I get it. You know, you can take things and move them into different areas. You know, and just depending on your setting and your story. I totally get that point of view.
Right, setting and story is certainly part of it, but I do think that there is a difference between science fiction horror. I can talk to that later if we decide to go down that path. Kris, Madison, Wisconsin. He's a lifelong cinephile who's never lost his love for horror. Every year for the last 8 years, he puts up a Halloween challenge on Facebook where every day he challenges he changes his profile picture into a horror movie still, and he is well versed in film as well as just horror films. If he had to twist his arm, he says his favorite film is Dario Argento's Suspiria. So why is that?
Oh, well, I think when I started really getting into horror and kind of expanding out of just the stuff that is on every horror shelf in the video store and started kind of getting into Italian and European horror, was about the same time as I was subscribing to Fangoria and Gorezone magazines. And so all of these kind of images from these movies that I couldn't get my hands on unless I went to some mail order rental place or some import from Japan or something like that, right? So when I finally found a copy of it, it blew my mind. I mean, the imagery, the colors, the hyper violent murders, the music, just everything created this like singular experience that was just unlike almost anything I had ever seen before. And every time I've revisited it, and I've had the great opportunity to see it a couple times on a big screen, you just get sucked right back into it, and it's like you're watching it again for the first time. It's one of those. It's a work of art.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the movies that if I have a non-horror fan, but they sound like they're really into art films, I show them Suspiria and I take whatever beating I get afterwards. If they can make it through the first 10 minutes, the movie has them. But if that first 10 minutes is really something else.
Pretty intense.
Yeah, no kidding. So Tim, Cleveland, Ohio. Tim's a software engineer who loves horror and heavy metal, something we definitely have in common. He's also a lifelong horror fan who says he's been chasing the dragon to get the feeling he got 10 years ago, or when he was 10 years old, on his first kiss. Now, his first kiss is one I didn't see, but I had heard about. It was a TV movie called Alien Abduction, Incident in Lake County. And I just want you to give me a little bit of information. Tell us a little bit about this first kiss.
Oh, gosh. So it's found footage style horror, right? And it seemed really real when I was a kid, when I was watching this on TV. And it's like this guy has his family over for Thanksgiving, and then a UFO crash lands in the backyard. And then next thing you know, the aliens are coming inside the house. And it felt so real, and every time they cut to commercials, they had these supposed experts come in and talk about what they're experiencing to legitimize everything. And as a kid, I mean, I thought everything about that was real, and I was afraid of aliens for years after that. I mean, it really struck a chord with me.
Yeah, I had never seen it, and I did a little bit of research on it and found out that this really was kind of like a mini War of the Worlds incident when this came on. I think it was on Fox, and people thought the same as you did, that at the commercial breaks we were coming back to people who were supposed to be sheriffs and politicians, and they thought something was actually happening. Now, I don't know, it wasn't as big as War of the Worlds was, but it definitely got people's attention. I wonder if it got Eduardo Sanchez's attention, because it came out the year before Blair Witch. And I think there's something really interesting about the power of that kind of suggestion that may have given us something that I think is really one of the great pivot points in horror, is the creation of Blair Witch Project at the end of the 90s, which was kind of a rough time for old-style horror film fans like myself. So I want to just open it up a little bit here, because we talked about a couple things already that are really interesting. I heard people watching TV and getting mesmerized by a show that was on. I heard people who watched what they could in the video stores, and then they had to go elsewhere for it. I found people who who just are relatively new to this, and all of a sudden this rather outre kind of movie style became something that they were really excited by. When I talk about becoming a horror fan, there's always like a university that you have to go to. That you have to learn all this somehow. And I always look to see where it is that you first got corrupted. So was it video store? Was it books that just turned into movies? Was it the uncle who said really terrible things and made you search something out? What was the first kiss? And Dan, why don't you start?
Sure. When I was a kid, used to spend the weekend at my aunt's house every so often, and she would be the one who would corrupt me and my brother with the horror movies. Mm-hmm. But as I grew up, we stopped spending time over there. So once I got back into it, it was all just on the internet. You can find anything anywhere. So I didn't really have to try too hard, didn't have to go out of my way. It was all right at my fingertips, anything I wanted.
Right. And you mentioned something really interesting. I will say that when I ask people, when I'm interviewing them at different places, was there anybody in the family that was a fan of horror? A lot of times, I would say 75% of the time, it's an aunt or the mother. As I rarely hear dad, And I think that's really interesting, or an older brother, that women at a certain point can really fall for this and really adore it, and they tend to carry that on to other people. My original spot was home box office before it was HBO, back when it was just in test. I was in Pennsylvania, and we were one of the pilot families, and they would put anything on there. So they would put really grotesque horror movies early in the day and stuff like that. But how about video stores kind of saved my life in the 90s, and they also let me, once I had the bug already, I did a lot of research looking at all these books, but I never got to see these movies. And then when the video stores opened, wow, it was like, now I can actually put a picture to the fear that I was feeling. How about Doug? Did you start with video, or was it something else?
Yeah. Well, because I'm 47, so when I was like 12 years old, VCRs were starting to become really popular back in the very early 80s. So I guess the person who might have corrupted me the most was my stepfather, because he was a big horror fan, and he loved all the old Hammer stuff, and we would spend weekends just going to the store and renting whatever. I remember I spent a weekend just watching Halloween 2 over and over because it was just like the greatest thing at that time. So I grew up in that VHS era, and I watched so many different things that way. But also I spent a lot of time, just as I got to be an older teenager, and driving and all that, and go out with my friends on the weekends and just spend our weekends at the movies, and I'd watch almost anything I could find that I could get into. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was so like a lot of other people just growing up at that VHS era.
yeah, exactly. Mine was slightly earlier, but VHS was the big change. And I remember, my gosh, when it first came out, I think VCRs were $1,000. My dad wanted to buy one, and he was saving silver dollars. So this dates me like a motherfucker. But at the same point, he was saving these things. And we were going to get a Beta, which didn't make it, Betamax. But we used to go, a bunch of us teenagers, we would save up our money, and you could rent a VCR with a driver's license and a credit card at the video store, and it had locks on it and all this stuff. It was a huge honking thing made out of metal, and you would only have like 12 movies that you could pick from at that time. And it was like The Sound of Music and The Wild Bunch. So I saw The Wild Bunch at an early age, and I was like hooked. I was going, I need to find more of this kind of adrenaline. And then the horror movies started to come out at that point. How about now, let's see, Kris. I wanted to talk a little bit about your first kiss, because Kris spent years trying to find a movie that scared him as a kid. And he didn't have a title, he just had some scenes. And I think we've probably all been there.
Yeah. Well, I kind of grew up in the same era as Doug, this video era, right, where so much of your education is just looking at these boxes and seeing all this art and these titles and images on the back of boxes. And, like you said, there wasn't a lot on regular TV either. And they would fill their programming with just by throwing all sorts of stuff on. So I remember we had a local show. It was called TJ and the Ant for the all-night theater, and they would just play movies all night until Saturday morning. And spent the night out in the living room with my older brother. I was probably 8, 9 years old or something like that. And there was a movie on that I only remember, like you said, a few images. And one of them was this guy who I think was tied to a tree, and suddenly this hand starts coming out of the ground, and he's trying to get away, but he can only go about 3 feet, and this thing crawls out of the ground and grabs him, and it's all over. And the other one that really struck me too, that I distinctly remember, was a guy in a locked bedroom with what I remembered being a corpse, and maybe he looked kind of greenish laying on the bed, and he was locked in this room. I don't know what was on the other side of the door, but he was safe because the door was locked, and at some point he turned and looked, and the corpse started sitting up and getting closer, and stood up and walked over to him, and that was it. And for years, those images, I couldn't get them out of my head. And we happened to be in Green Bay, about an hour outside of the town that I grew up in, visiting my grandmother in the hospital. And this video era, like what I like to do, was just to go into these video sections, just walk around and see if I could find something that I didn't know existed, or just, another image that would just capture my imagination. And as I'm walking through this horror section, killing time, while my parents are up in the hospital, I see this box with this greenish lettering, and it looks very similar to these images that I had seen. And I grabbed this box and flipped it over, and sure enough, there was this greenish corpse on the back of the box, and I was like, no way. Because this was, I don't know how many years later. So, then being the black sheep of the family that I was, I immediately went to my parents, said, I know we don't live in Green Bay, but could you please, get a membership to this video store so that I can rent this movie, so that we can bring it home, and you can bring it back tomorrow when you go to visit Grandma, because I've got to watch this. I need to see what this is. And sure enough, I watched it, and it was the movie that I had not remembered, or just had these flashes in my brain for years, and probably scarred me growing up. And it ended up being Bob Clark's Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things.
Yeah.
Which, I've seen again since, I watched again since, and it's, it's kind of cheesy, but, and I don't know if it's because I had seen it as a kid and it just like stuck with me, but there's just something about it that is just inherently creepy, as goofy as it is. It still kind of gets to me, so.
Yeah, well, all hail Bob Clark. He did
Yeah.
Black Christmas, he did Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, and he did Death Dream.
Yep.
And those 3 movies are really, really good in their own way. Yes, there's a little bit of cheese, and the budget's a little bit low, but he actually was one of the first strong voices in the modern horror movie. But I hear you when you said it took years. I think we've all been in that kind of quest. My first one like that was Burnt Offerings, Dan Curtis's Burnt Offerings. It was all about Betty Davis dying upstairs, and the hearse coming up, and the guy who's driving the hearse with the mirrored sunglasses coming up the thing. Scared me to death, and I wasn't sure if it was real or not. I had seen it at a time when I wasn't cognizant of, was this really happening or not. I thought it might be a documentary because it was on TV. It wasn't movie-like. And then years later, that same actor was in a video for like Cyndi Lauper. And I immediately, he had dark glasses on. I went, it's that guy that kills the grandmothers. And I had to find out what the movie was. And I ended up finding out it was Burnt Offerings. And I had another one that was, ended up being Last House on Dead End Street. And the only thing that I knew about it was from my aunt, who was a little crazy and loved horror movies, and she was telling me about this movie that she went to see in the movie theater where they're trying to break this woman's leg off, and they're putting smelling salts in her nose to keep her awake. And I'm like, oh my God, this sounds absolutely horrible. And then sure as shit, years later, I find this thing, and it's kind of like I went right back to that time when I first heard her talking about it, and I was in the other room, and I was scared by what she was saying. How about you guys? Who else? What was your quest that you found?
I've got one that was real vague. It's not quite like Kris's story where I had all these images in my head, but I remember seeing a movie when I was a kid where something happened and some guy got shot and came back from the dead, and there were monsters, and he was in catacombs or something. Had no idea, never really tried to find it again. But then a couple of years ago, I saw Nightbreed for, I thought, the first time, but the entire time watching it, it was just like one big deja vu. I'm like, oh my god, I've seen this before. That scene's familiar. It all just came crashing back to me. It's a surreal movie to begin with.
Oh yeah.
With that experience on top of it, it was a fun watch.
Yeah. How about who else has one before we move on? Anybody else have a quest? No.
I don't have a quest, but I will just add on to your Bob Clark comment. Bob Clark also did a Christmas Story and Porky's.
Yes.
So he made like at least 5 like almost revolutionary kind of genre or films of his time, and he was very influential and very overlooked.
Yeah.
So I just have to add that in about him.
I'm glad you did, because I worked at a video store where they actually had a Bob Clark section. It was a really cool video store, and it really changed my life in some ways. And they had his movies.
Nice. I worked in a video store too. I spent a good 10 years of my life working, jockeying videos across the counter. So.
Yep, I did that as well. Not for as long, but yeah.
Yeah. We all get our fix somehow.
Definitely.
Down in the corner, in the dusty room, there's that guy who knows all those movies.
Exactly. I missed that job.
Yeah. So for the group, I wanted to come up with a discussion here, and it's something that is common to what I saw in the emails from you guys. Not everybody mentioned it, but most of us did, where it was talking about horror, that we were movie lovers, not just horror movie lovers, but that there wasn't a reciprocation from other movie lovers. They don't have the same love for horror, or they don't give the same respect to other genres that people who are horror fans do to other genres that they may not be the number one thing for. So it's all about not getting respect from mainstream cineasts. So I wanted to talk a little bit about mainstream, or talk a little bit about respect and comment on that. So especially because I almost did an entire episode on something that really bothered me, and it had to do with, are any of you watchers of The Walking Dead?
Yes.
A little bit.
Yes.
All right. So it is horror for the sake of horror for AMC. When it first started, I felt it was really a horror show. It's gone up and down in its different ways, but it has become part of the popular culture to such a degree that Twitter crashes when something happens that's on The Walking Dead that's so big. There are people who do love stories, graphic novels about characters, that LARPing stuff, all of that gets done around The Walking Dead. So in a way, horror has become respectable in that one slot, but only that one slot. Now, people went out of their minds just a couple weeks ago, and it reminded me of the dangers of horror becoming mainstream and how people don't understand what they're playing with. So, of course, it's first off, spoiler alert. Everybody up to date on the show that needs to be up to date on it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 main characters, one most beloved, another that's really fun. Both got killed, but they didn't just get killed. A lot of times in shows, they give a really romantic death or a sad, tragic death that everybody gets to get teary-eyed. This was a horror death. They took both characters and basically beat them to death with a baseball bat with barbed wire on it, crushing their heads into paste in front of everybody else. And it took a long time to happen. And when I saw it, my jaw dropped and I went, holy cow, this is amazing. Of course, what happens in the regular world is people go insane and crash Twitter talking about how this show has gone over the edge. This is beyond the pale. This is torture porn. In fact, watchdog groups came out and said, this is too much for television. Now, I've been watching the show for how many seasons there are, and there was a guy who was caught in a turnstile who gets eaten alive and his face gets ripped off. They're suddenly horrified over this death. And of course, it's not about the death, the goriness of the death. It is in one way. They forgot they were watching a horror movie. They forgot they were watching a horror show. It's the scorpion that the frog lets up on top of it to swim across the pond. It's Siegfried and Roy forgetting that they're playing with real tigers, and then they get gored. So people got really destroyed by having a horror show actually be a horror show again. So this is what I think happens when horror enters the mainstream. But what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that struck me, because I saw a lot of that controversy on Facebook and Twitter, and I was puzzled by it because you're right, people forgot what they were watching, and Walking Dead kind of became this innocuous thing, I think, for most people. And what people, the season before, Rick and his group spent episodes murdering Negan's people.
Yep.
So, this was all payback for that. So imagine if Negan was the hero of the show, and here comes Rick and his group as the villains, and you flip that whole storyline. Well, yeah, you kind of would make sense to have that kind of vengeance for what happened. And that people didn't have a problem. I never heard anybody going hue and cry over Rick outright murdering people in cold blood.
Right.
We all kind of watching it, we were all kind of complicit with it. We're like, well, he's just doing what he needs to do to protect his group. And that was okay. The morality of that was okay. But suddenly when you show, beloved characters, getting bludgeoned to death brutally, everybody lost their shit over it.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned something really interesting, complicit. I'll come back to that because somebody wanted to talk.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think even outside of just horror, I think it goes to fandom, and you see that kind of with Game of Thrones and other shows like that. When these shows get really popular, the people who get really invested in these characters and really into the shows kind of co-opt them as something that they almost take partial ownership in. And so when things happen, then they feel like they have a say, or they get on George R.R. Martin's case for not writing books fast enough, or that's not what this character would do. How dare you do that? And it's kind of that really slippery slope of fandom that is really pretty prevalent now with the internet.
Yeah. So back to complicit, and it interests me in that, and I'll take a conversation from all you guys on this. First off, do you think some of that reaction was because unconsciously people were complicit in what happened before, and they suddenly had to realize that this is payment due, and our heroes haven't been exactly great? And if not that, talk about a movie that after you watched it, you felt complicit in what was going on. The moral ambiguity just freaked you out.
The movie that springs to mind in that respect that made me feel just disgusting after watching it, actually there's a couple. Last House on the Left, the original Wes Craven one, and the movie Maniac from 81, 82.
Yeah.
You watch those movies and you just, I looked at I asked myself, I'm like, why the hell am I watching this? I feel like I've just been, through this sleazy experience, and I can't escape it. I'd have to take 100 showers after watching it just to wipe off the experience. And I think that's maybe what people got a taste of with that episode.
Right.
Maybe they're not used to that because we, as horror fans, we'll go down these dark roads and watch movies and shows about, well, not really good people, and we'll put ourselves in those positions, sometimes identifying with them. I mean, I think the whole glorification of like Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, I always find it puzzling, and Freddy Krueger, because these are murderers, but yet they're kind of seen as the heroes amongst the fans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the boogeyman. Dan, reason I brought this up too is that Dan told me, he loves gore. Not a big fan of torture porn, but of course some of the Hellraiser and things like that. But it's not just those. There's movies, one that I always try to get people to watch after somebody did it to me, called Sleep Tight, and one called We Are What We Are.
Yes.
And those are movies that you can feel really morally grungy after watching, or just feel horrible. I mean, We Are What We Are is an amazingly impactful film. So what is it that draws you to that?
Man, I don't know. But those are two really great examples. Yeah, I still remember the first time I saw Sleep Tight. It took a while for me to get to sleep, just running the events of the movie over and over in my head, thinking how terrible that guy was and what I would do in that situation. I don't know what drew me to it. Someone recommended it to me, and I don't know, just that intense emotional impact is enjoyable somehow, even though it is so dirty and nasty and depressingly terrible.
Yeah, it seems to me, at least, that I'm kind of facing some things about me that I don't necessarily like, but at least I'm doing a real quick, brief handshake with it and then moving on, especially around Sleep Tight, because I don't know how long it's been any of you watched Hitchcock's Psycho, but I find that the thing that gets me the most now is when Anthony Perkins first comes in and finds Janet Leigh dead. And there's this suspense of, is he going to get caught? And the car being poured into the swamp, and it stops. It's not sinking all the way. And I get this real dread. And I realize how brilliant what Hitchcock was doing was. Even though you don't know it's the bad guy, you are feeling a sympathy for someone who is doing something wrong. And in Sleep Tight, they force that at you again, where you get to see him standing on the edge of the building. Now, I still wanted him to jump off, but at the same point, there is the sequence where he's inside of the apartment, where the two are making love in the bathroom, and he's trying to get out of there. And I think he had chloroformed himself by mistake and was woke up under the bed realizing people were in the room. And I found myself going right back to that Psycho moment of, oh my God, I don't know if I want this guy to get caught at this point. I'm really conflicted.
Yeah, that's just, regular movies. You always root for the guy who's in a bind at whatever particular moment in the movie. It just feels reflexive to feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, most of you have mentioned that you like movies outside of horror movies as well, any kind of movies. But there's something that outside of just, oh, it's bloody and, oh, I get to see a monster every so often, that draws you in. If you were talking to somebody, what would you tell them you think is the key thing that they're missing when they're watching a horror movie or refuse to watch a horror movie?
Yeah, I think what it is with horror movies is that so many other movies, the good guy wins, the bad guy loses, the good guy gets the girl, everyone, it's just happy endings. And in horror movies, you don't get that too often. A lot of times, a lot of people you like die, like going back to the Walking Dead thing that you were talking about, where a beloved character dies, and it's uncomfortable, makes you feel uneasy. And I really respect that, because that's how a lot of life is. I mean, everything's not all happy and roses and everything. Like, it's just, it feels more real. It's not, I don't know, it doesn't seem so fake,
Yeah, and I hear from a lot of people actually that don't like to watch horror movies. Like, I get enough of this kind of stuff in real life. Why would I want to go to the movies to watch that too?
I want their life. Holy cow.
Yeah, right. But it's one of those things, and I have some friends who are like, if I watch a scary movie, I'll have nightmares for a week, and I won't be able to sleep, and I won't be able to do this. And I found, like, for me, it's kind of the opposite, where I think that kind of helps me process some of that anxiety and some of those fears just by, having some kind of an outlet.
Oh, nice.
I agree with that. I think horror is a great outlet for just kind of playing with those feelings and for 90 minutes, sitting with an idea that's really uncomfortable, and it just helps you kind of deal with reality in a way, where because life can be so horrible.
Yeah.
and so it's funny, I find myself retreating into these strange little horror films from the past, because I find it much more comfortable to deal with than when I sit there and watch the news at night.
Yeah, no kidding. And I feel kind of the same way. In fact, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about how times in my life that were the most stressful were when I found horror films the most beneficial for me. Mm-hmm. So when I was a child, and I mean, I'm not in control of anything. I've got these two big human beings that are my adults that are coming up with ideas that are basically decimating life as we know it, and government and teachers, and I am not in control, and there are bullies. And for some reason, watching horror movies, it was like, yes, you get what I'm talking about. You empathize with me. Even if the sun goes down, the nice music comes up, the bully's going to come and pull my hair and throw me in the snowbank, whatever it is. And horror movies gave me that thing of like, oh yeah, I can kind of survive that. You know, it's like, oh, I survived something that was really disturbing. And it might be that it's something that is still somewhat controllable. I'm not in control if I'm at a movie theater of stopping the movie, but I'm always able to get up and go to the bathroom if I want to just close my eyes. So there's still a segment of control in it. But I found that it felt better if I didn't close my eyes, you know, if I watched the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah. And
Bear witness to it.
Even especially like as a young child, maybe having a way to orient those kind of feelings you might be having that you might not completely understand or be able to process. As you were talking, I kind of thought, like I realized kind of the time when I started getting into like gravitating towards monster movies and books about them was kind of about the same time that my parents got divorced. And so I don't know if there's, you know, something that kind of parallels there, just kind of where I gravitated towards that, where it's like, hey, yeah, this kind of, I don't know what this is, but, you know, it's, you know, similar. I find something similar in it maybe.
Yeah, it helps. The same with me. My parents got divorced. I was like 12, and that's when I discovered watching these films as well. And I think it really helps you process that part of life, that, you know, that life is messy sometimes and life is uncomfortable, and it kind of gives you a little armor to deal with it. And it's a really good thing. And sometimes I worry, like, I don't want to shake my fist at the younger generation, but I see a lot of like kids coming up behind us who they're raised on Disney, the Disneyification of everything, and everything's like this perfect world, and they won't, you know, they can't deal with other forms of media that might be uncomfortable. Absolutely. You know, I grew up watching Dawn of the Dead, and they're growing up watching, you know, Jafar and Aladdin, and it's like, yeah, you know, there's a time and place for everything, but I sometimes worry that we're making them, or
even like things. Even movies like The Last Unicorn or The Dark Crystal, something that's a little darker with things to process that they don't quite get. Right. Whereas now, it's so whitewashed in so many places. It's like they don't know what to do when something real actually happens.
Right. Well, I believe it or not, I don't know if I necessarily agree with all of that, because I think that in a way I was much more sheltered as a kid than they are. So I don't necessarily, I grew up in a time where my parents didn't necessarily know where I was all the time. And homework was maybe 2 hours after school. And you might go to college or you might not. Now it's you got to go to college. Now it's nothing but being constantly hit by onslaughts of stuff that perhaps the Disneyfication might be helpful. But really, I think that's court-appointed horror. That's court-appointed movies. Your parents are making you Disneyfied. You may become, what worries me is people my age that are Disneyfied. You know, people who are like, I go to Disney World 5 times a year, and I've done it every year since I was 12. Those are the people I worry about, you know, because there's a world out here, son, and you seem to have missed it. But I think the children who are getting that, I know when I was young, I did nothing but Disney because that was my dad's thing and my mom's thing. They were getting divorced, so things started getting a little bit weird around then. But that was court appointed. You know, whenever it would get so scary, they would turn it off. You know, I remember watching a movie called Charade, and there was water coming from underneath the bathroom door. And as soon as Cary Grant goes to open the door, my dad goes, "Shut your eyes." Because he had seen the movie and he knows there's going to be a dead body in the tub. And so I had to shut my eyes. So I was really, in a way, that heavy-duty parenting was sheltering me. But when I broke out, I broke out, death metal and really hardcore horror. It gave me a difference, like a compare-contrast. So I'm not necessarily sure with all the stuff that's happening in the world that Disneyfication isn't going to come back and bite them in the butt. Once you get over a certain age, I think certainly it might be. But, man, I don't even know what would be left of me if I was growing up in the world of hentai and all of that happening as a teenager, readily available. Who knows what I would have ended up as. So if anybody comes out of this thing reasonably put together and likes horror and just horror, I'm kind of surprised. So what do you think, being film aficionados as you are, what horror film, if any, do you consider perfect? You don't think it could be improved on?
Alien.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have several.
It's pretty great. You know what's really funny about that? My 13-year-old, who doesn't like scary things at all, was watching some Let's Play videos of some Alien video games and kind of got into them. Was like, I think I'd like to watch this movie. And
Nice.
so I was like, okay, you realize like you still yell at me for showing you Super 8 like 5 years ago. And,
oh my God.
Yeah, right. So he's, to be fair, we showed him Coraline when he was much too young, so he's still scarred by that as well. But so he wanted to watch it, and I was like, okay. So we sat down and we kind of talked it through, and we had the lights on, and the dog was in the room, and his mom and I were both there, and I even said, okay, now there is a scene in the middle. If you don't know that it's coming, it's very, very shocking. It's gross. A lot of people, it's very infamous, and it's pretty traumatic. I will tell you when it's coming if you want. He's like, oh, whatever. Well, just watch it. And we did. We got to the end of it, and he was like, I didn't think that movie was very scary at all. What are you talking about?
That's the worst.
I mean, well, yeah, that's fine. But he, part of it was like, oh, it's like a horror movie, and I kind of knew what was going to happen. I was like, okay, but what about this? And he's like, nope. I had even seen it in a film class I took in college as an example of, it was a film styles and genre class, and they used the horror genre as kind of the metric to explain what makes a genre. We watched that, and I had seen it I don't know how many times. And watching it in a room full of people, again, you still like, oh, I'm back there. This movie is so tense and so good. I do not understand what he watched, but...
Right. Jaws is in that list for me.
Yeah.
I think that Jaws, from the first moment, if he doesn't screw up that first 5 minutes, he's got me completely. And that's pretty much how Spielberg worked on that. Now, something that was just mentioned about watching it on the big screen, I took some film classes too, and they showed Night of the Living Dead on the big screen. And it was amazing how good that movie is on a big screen. Yeah. And how it just slowly. Now I was jaded. I'm the older guy in the room once again, and I was the one who saw it, and there were a bunch of people. This was 96, 97, had never seen it before, and watching them have this dread nightmare happening to them was really, really good. There is still that moment where when they start to realize that all the zombies are outside, how many there are, you hear the moan. People actually audibly moan still. And I'm like, damn, this movie is old, and it still works. It still has that effectiveness on the big screen. So that's one, yes, I will say that the acting could be better, but I think that's a perfect one as well.
Yep. At the end too. We just saw it in the theater about a month ago, my son and I. And the end, it was clear that someone in the theater had not seen it because they gasped at the end. And it was like, yeah, man, it's still, like you said, it's still got it.
Yeah,
I would love
upsetting
to see
the
that
apple cart.
Yep.
Yeah. So, any others that you think are just perfect? I can't believe we all agree.
Personally, I really love The Descent. I might put that as a perfect one for myself.
That's a good one.
Really like that movie. Now, did you see the version that was in the theaters, or did you see the one that had the ending he wanted?
I'm not sure which one is which.
The sad ending or the
Right.
not so sad ending?
Yeah, the sad ending or the jumpy one.
Yeah, the sad ending for sure. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
the
the birthday cake.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
Gotcha.
that is where I think that it is pretty much a masterwork. I also, controversially enough, think Martyrs is a movie that I can't see getting any better.
I love Martyrs.
But I will see
The original
yeah.
one, right?
Yeah,
The original, yes. I made the mistake, like a bad fever dream. I watched the new one. Oh man,
I heard it's pretty
Tough.
bad.
It's
I heard it's
Alpo.
okay.
It is
Yeah.
Alpo.
I actually thought it was kind of okay the first half or so. I thought, this is actually surprising me because I thought it was going to be complete garbage. But it was okay up until a certain point around the middle where they started changing the plot and made it more Americanized, and then the ending was completely different. And it's like, what are you doing? It was perfect. Why'd you guys do that? Come on.
I know.
Ugh.
Ooh, I see a list on our Wretched Round Table. Somebody texted, let's see,
Yes.
Alien, The Thing, American Werewolf in London. Is that what AWIL is? All right.
Yep, that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you got it.
And
The Fly.
The Fly. Yes.
Ooh.
Yes.
And you just,
The Fly.
That one's on my short list too.
Think about the grouping of those films. They all came out around the same time, and we're a lucky generation that grew up to have those films, and they really are perfect. Every time I watch any of them, I return to them all the time. They are perfect films. I wouldn't change one frame or add one thing to them.
Yeah. I will actually go and say that the most amazing one out of that group, the one that is lightning in the bottle more than any other, is American Werewolf in London, because it is maybe the only movie out of maybe Return of the Living Dead that balanced horror and comedy so well that it was both really funny and really scary.
Ooh.
Yeah, it really is a perfect film. It's everybody argues about their favorite werewolf movie from that time, but that's always mine. I know The Howling's well loved, and I like The Howling a lot, but nothing compares to American Werewolf in London. I think that film is I just can't believe how perfect that movie is.
I really like The Howling, but it's coy compared to what American Werewolf does. That's some mature characterization and humor, and then some really amazing visuals. And it is a forgotten film in its own way.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it kind of gets overlooked a lot. People kind of take it for granted, or they just kind of brush it off and think it's too funny to be horror. And I disagree. The balance in that film is just amazing.
It is pretty great. I would throw in Poltergeist. I think that was pretty close. Because from start to finish, it's kind of like Jaws in the way that it's constructed, and just is kind of innocent and playful, but kind of each scene ramps up the tension, and the family unit is like any family that you've seen. It feels real. It feels like you're watching an actual family go through this bond together, and it's just it's pretty fantastic.
Suburban horror at its finest.
Yeah. So you bring up Jaws, and one of the things that is most memorable in that is, of course, the speech that Quint gives. And it's that foreshadowing of terrible things. And it's one of the things that I see in some of the really good horror movies that are out there. They don't give you just the scares. They actually tell you a story, like a campfire story in there that just sets the tone. I think the movie Seven is nothing but that scene done through an extent of a movie. You never see a death, and it just gives you that dread. But what's your favorite of those kind of stories? The USS, I forgot, Missouri.
The Indianapolis?
Indianapolis, that's it, not Missouri. So is there a story from a movie that hit you like that? One that is a favorite?
The one that jumps out, but although it's not as serious as that, is the story in Gremlins where she talks about why she doesn't like Christmas.
Oh, yeah!
It's so great.
I mean, it doesn't have the same oomph as Robert Shaw's speech, but it always stuck with me when she talks about how horrible that was.
Yeah.
Especially because she ends it with chimney. I'm sorry. Especially because she just ends it with that coda, and that's why I hate Christmas.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's great. Now, Halloween has two of them. And the one that's most remembered is by Dr. Loomis. But the one that I love is the gravedigger, the caretaker in the cemetery, where he says, oh, yeah, Judith Myers. That reminds me. Something had happened to... And he talks about... And he got up from dinner, and he gets a hacksaw, and then they never finish the story.
That's a great moment. A great moment.
Just holds you there. It's like a hook. Any others?
Yep.
I think this might sort of count in the Banshee chapter.
Great movie.
Yeah, the main character, I forget the actor's name, but he recounts, some of the details about MK Ultra, which is especially scary because that actually happened. Our government actually did those experiments and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that sets the tone for the whole conspiracy theory-minded horror to follow.
So we talked about movies that we think are really perfect. What movies do you think are overrated, and why?
Personally, Drag Me to Hell. I'm not sure about you guys, but I was not a fan of that one bit.
I do not like it.
I love that movie.
It came with
Did you really?
like people who I respect their opinion of love that movie, and they're like, you gotta watch it. And I watched it. I'm like, what the hell, guy? Why did you make me watch this? It was like a teen thriller. It had all the classic tropes. I was so angry. I had to watch. I had to leave the house. It was bad.
Wow. I didn't have it that bad, but I will say I saw Drag Me to Hell right after seeing, oh my goodness, Paranormal Activity in the theater, and I came home to my Amazon package coming with Drag Me to Hell, and I'm like, I should watch this, and maybe this will cleanse me of what I feel from Paranormal Activity, which really creeped me out when I first saw it in the theater. And I love the last 5 minutes of that movie. Is like, holy shit, that was really good. But it drove me a little crazy because I couldn't tell. It's once again that American Werewolf in London thing. It's so hard to get that balance right. And I just felt the Sam Raimi, who used to make Three Stooges movies, kind of took over in that thing. And I was like, I can see where he's going, but I can't help but feel that he doesn't really like horror movies anymore.
I just think that's what Sam Raimi is now, and even with like the new Evil Dead series.
Yeah,
I know I didn't like Army of Darkness. I remember my friends and I went to see that, and we all kind of grumbled after that ended. And that's what it is now. Army of Darkness is Evil Dead, and that's how it is. And I actually enjoy the show. I just take it for what it's worth now. It's just a horror comedy show. It's not really about horror so much, but it's just goofiness and the charm of Bruce Campbell kind of gliding through on that. But I would get back to your question about overrated. I'd have to give it to the Friday the 13th series, because I mean, I've watched them. I think I've watched almost all of them. I can appreciate moments in certain things, but overall, I just don't get the love for these films that everybody seems to have.
Right.
They're some of my favorites, actually.
There we go. I was hoping there'd be a rebuttal. Go, guys.
I know. Well, I don't know. They don't do it for me overall.
No, I can see that.
Sleepaway Camp any day over Friday the 13th.
Sleepaway.
There we go.
Yeah. There you go. There you go.
Yeah. That's one that has something to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just, because that's got something to say, so it kind of transcends the really terrible dialogue and the really sketchy stuff that goes on at the camp, Sleepaway Camp. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know. I really kind of like the cheesiness of the Friday movies. But
I find that for me, and I'm just going to talk about me personally on this, I find that I'm Linus. I want the most sincere pumpkin patch. That's what I'm looking for. And when I saw the first Friday the 13th, the original one, I went, holy shit, this is punk rock. This is good. Yeah. I was like, it really blew my mind. It was completely different than anything else. It said, oh, you want to flirt around with gore? No. Let's just go all the way on this. And it was Bay of Blood and all of that. It's actually an extension of that movie. But it really worked. It was fast and furious, but it wasn't about Jason Voorhees and about what this iconography became. I found that slasher movies in general, and this might be upsetting to some, I felt that they were all kind of bad. I got bored with them very, very quickly because they became unimaginative. They were imaginative in the death, but they followed a template that was so predictable that I found myself getting bored. And I don't know, have any of you guys seen the documentary Going to Pieces? There's a great documentary about the slasher film. And they talked to this guy who's now a rabbi who made a horror movie in Canada. They just had some venture capital money, and they decided, well, slasher movies are pretty big. He didn't know anything about horror because he was a rabbi. And he goes to the movie and watches something like Friday the 13th with a stopwatch. And he realized that there's a kill every 5 minutes, and at minute 30, you do this. And he said, I went to a couple movies, and the stopwatch tended to work. So he made a movie off of the stopwatch of what he saw as patterns, and he had a semi-successful horror film. And for me, I just liked the originality of what I felt when I saw Halloween and the slasher films. I think that's why I gravitated so much to Hellraiser and to Day of the Dead, because they were so not those movies.
Right. They were invested in imagination.
You could say a lot of bad things about Hellraiser, but formulaic they are not.
Right. Well, all 9, I don't know. That's a survivor talking right there.
You really watch all 9 in one weekend? That's bananas, man.
It was 6 days, not just one weekend.
Oh, right.
Okay, well, that's better.
Yes,
I don't know.
Averaging more than one a day.
It's interesting. I was talking with somebody about like the slasher phenomenon. So they're so popular. It was so popular for so long. Like, what is the appeal? Because they are, for the most part, very formulaic. And I don't know if it's just the familiarity with it. You know exactly what it's going to be. You know,
Right.
like you said, with a stopwatch, and so you don't have to worry about what's going to happen. You just come in to see how it's going to play out. And so,
Yeah.
you know, it kind of, I mean, yeah, it takes some of the audience's work away from them, but at the same time, then you're kind of like, okay, we got the ground level already laid out, and then I can just enjoy and be surprised by how they tell the same story.
Right.
Yeah, it's like all-purpose comfort food for people.
Yeah.
You know, like everybody knows what they're going to get when they try it out.
The Walking Dead phenomenon. It's its own version of mainstream. Because do you really think those were horror movies at a certain point? I didn't even think they were trying to scare me.
No, I don't think that was ever the point. No. It was always about a soap opera around zombies.
Right. What do you think is the movie that did scare you that it would be unexpected for us to hear? It could be any genre.
Have you guys seen Irreversible?
Oh my God.
Okay, it didn't scare me, but it was. I've tried 3 times now to watch it, and I just turn it off at the same scene every single time because I cannot make it through it. Like,
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
so I don't,
You know, on.
I'll go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well,
I'm sorry.
It's not really scary. It's just it makes you feel
disturbing.
so uneasy that you just don't feel right watching it. So
Yeah. And it's an amazing film because it starts out with such brutality.
Oh my God.
And you work your way backwards into this weird beauty at the end, and you just become even sadder because of it.
Yeah.
I guess I would have to say maybe one that scared me. Well, actually, you know what? The first Paranormal Activity movie scared me pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, as a grown man, I was like, okay, yeah, you got me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
One that really disturbed me, and it kind of goes along with your Martyrs comments, is a movie called Inside.
Nice.
Oh yes.
That movie is so disturbing
Yeah.
on so many levels, and it was really upsetting to watch.
Yeah. Outside of like Dead Alive, and I categorize Dead Alive as its own category, Dead Alive. But I would say that Inside is the goriest movie I've ever seen. I don't know if I've ever seen anything bloodier than that thing.
Yeah. It's just awful.
Yeah, it's wet. It's a very wet film.
Yes, very wet.
So we're at 1 hour, folks. How do you guys feel?
I'm
pretty good. Actually, I have a question for you guys. How do you guys feel about horror comedies? Because I've gotten in debates with pals about that, on whether or not they should be even considered horror movies, or if they should be in their own like separate genre, like keep them separate from each other. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts?
I'm for them.
Yeah,
I like them.
Zombieland was, pretty great movie. A lot of fun. Hit the horror and comedy beats at the same time.
Yeah. If you can strike that balance, I think it works really well.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like if it's making me laugh so much, then it's more of a comedy, and it doesn't instill that sense of dread and make me feel uneasy on the inside. Then I'm just watching a comedy or watching an action flick. Like, I'm not a fan personally.
It's interesting to think about. Horror and comedy are structurally very similar in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. And in fact, like they both set up this moment of tension, and one releases with somebody jumping or screaming, and one releases with somebody laughing because something either unexpected or shocking is going to happen, and it's either something funny or something scary, but they're easily interchangeable in that way.
Yes.
It's good. It's a very good point.
That's excellent. That's something that I've talked about before, which is that the two things that are the hardest to do because they both work on timing and tension are comedies and horrors, and they are the most they're the most lightweight when it comes to the Oscars and stuff like that. They're dismissed. And yet if they don't work, there's nothing worse than a bad comedy. You know, and there's nothing worse than a horror movie that goes nowhere. You can survive a tepid drama that is your ABC school thing of the week. People don't go insane over that. But if a comedy sucks, man, people get angry.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
Ooh, so I see somebody wrote The Devil's Rejects overrated. Care to go on that?
Well, I don't know. When I watched it, I just couldn't get into it, and I don't know. I'm not maybe the hugest fan overall of Rob Zombie's films, but I really enjoy what he's trying to do, and his visual aesthetic is pretty fantastic. Just for whatever reason, and I don't know if it was the dialogue that it was like, you know, the F word every 3 words, and just like I was like, okay, and you know, I just overrated in the sense that I hear a lot of people say, oh, that's hands down his best movie, and oh, this is, you know, one of the best movies to come out of that era, and it was like, really? Because I didn't get it when I watched it.
I can agree with that. I have the same trouble with it. I've watched it several times, and I never connect with it, and I have trouble. I usually don't have trouble with morality in films. Like I don't care. I like anti-heroes. I'm all about that. It kind of would almost infuriate me, but I guess it's a compliment to the film,
Right.
That I get so incensed by these characters as being heroes that maybe that's the point. I don't know, but yeah, I'm not into it that much either.
And I guess I feel like that whole, you know, are the good guys really good or the bad guys really bad thing has just been done a little bit better in other movies,
Right.
Like Last House on the Left, or even I Saw the Devil, which came out recently.
Ooh, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't know. I should probably revisit it because I haven't seen it more than once. But
Well, I will say that you, once again, a very good point. It's the moral jumping off point in that film. I think that most people look at the aesthetics of the film, the way it's shot, how the style, and even the impact of some of the violence, which is actually pretty heavy duty. They're good with that. But it's the moral ambiguity. There's something about these characters as opposed to, you know, the guys that are in the Wild Bunch or any other film that has anti-heroes. They step over a line. I think skinning the guy's face might be it. I don't know, but there's that moment where you're no longer really going to be on their side, or if you are, you're doing it almost out of a dare. And I think that's why some people are very big on that film. It's almost like a shot of some crazy drug that you go down that path and you allow yourself to go down there. But I don't want the Firefly family to live at the end of the film. You know, I think it's poignant that they died a free bird.
yeah, right.
But
no, that's pretty great.
You know, it says everything you need to know about those guys. So how about soft spot? So do each of you have a movie that you know it's not that good? You've watched it a couple times, but you love it anyway. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think I have one of those. Pretty much all the sequels to the Paranormal Activity films.
Right.
I still like them. I still find a way that they have at least one moment that they manage to creep me out, even though I know as the series goes on, the returns diminish on that. But overall, I could watch those films over some other garbage, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the third one might be my favorite of the whole series.
Yeah, that was the
retro one.
The retro one, right? That's where they go backwards into her story. Yeah.
Anybody else?
I've always been a fan of Alien Resurrection. I think it's agreed that it's the worst of all the Alien movies. Maybe not the first AVP, but I can watch that movie over and over. It's just so goofy.
It's bizarre.
But then like that final scene with the human alien hybrid where it's getting sucked out of the spaceship, it still creeps me out and gives me the chills every time I see it.
Nice.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
So for The Shining, not in a bad way, just in a nostalgia sense that I watched a lot growing up, and now I've got this tradition with one of my buddies where every year after the first big snowfall here in Ohio, we get together, we watch The Shining, we drink wine, we drink scotch, and just it's a really great experience and everything. And something about wintertime hitting makes me start thinking about The Shining more and more. And so, yeah, I got a soft spot for that, but not in a bad way or anything.
Yeah. Okay, well, here's where I get executed at dawn. The movie that I think is the most overrated is The Shining. I think The Shining is very overrated. And I will say that being a huge right, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Being a big Kubrick fan, that takes a lot to say. Being a big Stephen King fan takes a lot to say. But I think that the Shining
Scott, why you gotta do me like that? Come on.
Now, I'm just saying for me, it's overrated. Now, I don't say that it's a bad movie. I think it's very good, but it is overrated in how influential it has been. Considering the source material, I think, had a much better horror story to tell. He told a different horror story. I mean, he made a ghost story. And it's a good, chilling ghost story, but it's not The Shining. And so I feel that if it wasn't Kubrick, and I say that there are movies that suffer from the Shining disease. You can see them a million miles away. They're the artistic horror film that starts with Sunday, Monday, and someone out chopping wood in the winter. And there's all these, they don't have the talent of Kubrick. Kubrick can stretch those scenes. But with that, I will say for its running time, for all of the stuff that's in there, I've seen this rated as the scariest movie of all time these days, and I just cannot agree with that. And so for me, it's overrated. Not bad, just overrated. So I'm not dumping completely on it, but I kind of come from where Stephen King comes from in a way. When he saw the movie, he said, I think Stanley Kubrick makes films just to hurt people because it wasn't his story. Yeah. And Kubrick's well known for that. I mean, the original Dr. Strangelove was a serious book, and he turned it into a comedy. So he has a way of taking these things and moving them around. But for me, there are great moments in The Shining. But when it first came out, how many of you guys saw it in the movie theater?
I did not.
I saw it 2 years ago in the movie theater.
Yeah, I saw it in the movie theater too. It's a completely different experience.
Yeah, and I saw it in the movie theater when it came out. And I can tell you nobody was calling it a masterpiece at that point.
Oh, dang.
They were going out of their way to try and come up with a way to talk about how the movie was. I remember Time magazine saying, like a near car crash, this movie will chill you afterwards. And all anybody talked about was how much Jack Nicholson overacted and destroyed the movie. That was the original consensus about The Shining. So it interests me how, as time goes on, reputation grows. I will say that I think The Thing had the opposite. It gets better as the years go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll accept that. Yeah.
I'll accept that answer. How do you feel about the...
As everybody hangs up.
Yeah, I know, right? We're done.
No, that's my first snow of the year movie. Like, that, when the snow's falling, the ground's all white, I put on The Thing.
Nice, Dan. You got to figure it out, man.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my favorite winter movie, is The Thing. But I will say that I watch The Shining at least, well, I'll watch it once a year because I also want to watch the documentary around it, too.
Oh, the Room 237?
No, the one that was directed by his daughter. I got the box set. Yeah, I got the box set of Kubrick's. Like I said, I'm a Kubrick guy, and so it took a lot for me to say that.
No, that's good. You threw him under the bus nicely. It was good.
Yeah, well, you know, this is a horror thing.
How did you feel about the Mick Garris directed Shining?
No, I didn't really like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me that kind of makes Kubrick's film even better because I know Kubrick took the work and made it his own, but I think that's what he does best.
Now, I did like Jerusalem's Lot, and even with Rob Lowe as one of the main characters.
Yeah, right.
I thought that was a really good rendition. The problem with Mick Garris, it's a terrible thing to say, but the name of his production company is Nice Guy Productions, and everybody calls him Nice Guy. He's a nice guy that got Masters of Horror together. He needs a bad bone in his body. He can't scare me for shit.
Yeah, he's made some pretty terrible movies. That Sleepwalkers film and a few others.
Man,
just nowhere.
And I want to like him. Everybody likes him.
Right?
But it's just, no, it's not a good, these are not good movies. So I know I asked you guys, we talked about it before, about coming up with something that you'd blow my mind or blow everybody else's mind, because we're all lovers of movies. We're all here to try and learn, to find something new. We're always looking for the next fix. So why don't we go around? Tell me what movie we haven't seen, or what would blow my mind. What's a great thing?
I was going to say Sleep Tight, but apparently I haven't seen that, so I'm going to come up with another one.
I was thinking the Masters of Horror. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with them, but that's something I see surprisingly few content of on the internet when I'm seeing people talking about horror films, because there's a lot of episodes. I mean, there's 60-minute episodes, and it's a lot of famous directors, and I mean, they're all pretty much hit or miss, but there's a lot of good stuff in there, and I don't hear anyone talking about it really ever, and I feel like more people need to watch that. I think they're like early 2000s, maybe late 2000s. They were on Showtime, I think.
Yep.
And then didn't it transfer over to NBC as like Fear Itself or something like that?
Yes, it did.
And then it wasn't quite as good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Mick Garris was involved with that too.
Oh boy.
Poor Mick. I mean, poor me. If I ever meet him and this ever gets out, I'm a dead man. He's a really nice guy. I just don't. It's just his movies aren't my cup of tea. I will say that out of Masters of Horror, there were only a few that I really liked. I did really like Cigarette Burns, and I know that's divisive. Some people are like, "Oh man, I hated that," but I thought it was actually a pretty witty idea.
Yeah, I love that because it's about a guy searching for the most messed up horror film that caused the audience to go mad and lose their minds, and so they destroyed all copies, but one might exist, so he's going to try and find it. And that's kind of like Inside All of Us. We're trying to find like that one horror movie that's going to hit us like it did when we were kids and makes you afraid to fall asleep and everything. Like, it's great.
Yeah, the scene that I fell in love with was when he went to see the movie critic. And the movie critic is talking about this movie that he had seen, and he's saying that he's been working on this review, and and he keeps going on and on and on about it. And he's a hoarder. The place is full of paper everywhere and filing cabinets. And the guy finally says, "So where is this review?" And he goes, "It's all around you. I'm almost finished." And I was like, "Yes, I know what you're talking about, dude."
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I would offer for like a recent film that I thought was kind of interesting, and I'm still struggling with how I feel about it, is Neon Demon.
Oh yeah,
Nicholas Winding Refn's movie. It's a beautiful looking film, and I think there's some kind of commentary going on. There's got to be some kind of commentary going on about the entertainment business and Hollywood eating its young, literally. And I think for horror fans, I think you should definitely take a look at it. Because he's dealing in some of, I think there's definitely a Suspiria influence in it with the way it's shot. So if you like, and I know he likes he likes the old exploitation 70s films, so he's very much influenced by that. So I think if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. Yeah.
Was that the same guy who directed Drive?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's on my list. I want to definitely see it sometime.
Yeah, he also did Valhalla Rising, which I highly recommend if you get a chance.
And Bronson.
I'm a big fan of
it.
Most of his movies, he's pretty great.
Yeah. Now, all we're going to do is talk about how bad The Shining is. No.
If we want
Scatman Brothers. No.
Did you see the paintings he had in his room at home? He had the two topless ladies and one above the TV behind the bed. That's amazing. Who does that?
Right.
The camera slowly backs out so you can see them slowly.
Right. I thought that was awesome. That was kind of Mr. Halloran from the original. I mean, he was that way, but that's freaking hilarious. I love that you.
And Lloyd's the best goddamn bartender from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, or whatever it is.
Right.
It's good stuff.
So movies that I would this is actually great that somebody mentioned new movies. I know we've spent a little bit of time talking about movies that have impacted us, but new movies are really our life's blood. So what would you say are good new, do all of you have Netflix or some kind of streaming? Let's play Netflix roulette. What have you watched recently that we should be seeing?
Well, there's one that I thought of. I think it's streaming on one of those. It's a film from Iran called Under the Shadow.
I've heard of that. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's takes place during the Iran-Iraq War, and this woman and her daughter are trapped in their apartment when a bomb hits nearby, and there's a djinn that is haunting the building and then coming after her daughter. And so it's really, there are a couple of scenes that are very tense and frightening, but it's a really interesting commentary on war, the women's role in that society. It's just a lot going on. It's really well worth your time.
Very good. I'll be making a list, by the way, of everything that we talk about, so we can put that out on the site, so we can actually find our stuff.
Speaking of Iranian movies, was A Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night, was that Iranian?
Yes.
Yeah.
What do y'all think about that? I thought it was a little more art house than what I was ready for when I saw it.
Yeah, that would be one that I kind of said was suffering from the shining disease, which is a lot of long shots that are supposed to really give me dread. The only time that worked was when you start to realize that the rocks on the side of the street are not rocks; they're actually bodies piled in a pit. That really worked. That was really effective. But I did find it a little slow.
I thought it was really good. I think it speaks to an upcoming talent. I think she's got a lot more to show. I'm very excited about what she'll do in the future.
I agree. I think that it was how do you call it? Not unsteady, but it didn't quite. It felt like almost like a student film that was just released. So it'd be really interesting to see what the second movie or third movie is going to be like, because there's a lot of ambition. There's some people that, man, I just love their ambition. I hope that they move forward with it.
I have two from, I think they're both on Netflix. One's called The Invitation, which is Karen Kusama's film.
Ooh, yeah.
That is a really good movie. I don't want to say too much about it other than all you need to know is a couple gets an invitation to go to his ex-wife's house for dinner.
Right.
And then,
First mistake.
And there's a lot of unspoken drama that plays out over the course of the evening until it reveals what the true nature of the film is about. I would definitely recommend that. And also, there's another film. It's a slasher film, but it's called Hush.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's really
Mike
good.
Flanagan, who just did this. He just did the sequel to not Oculus, Ouija. That's it.
Ouija 2. Yep. He did
Okay,
Oculus as well.
that's right. Yeah, Oculus. That's right. And his other film. And he's another young, or I don't know if he's young, but he's a new talent. And Hush is about a deaf woman who's being stalked by a masked killer in her house in the middle of the woods. So you have this whole play on like what Wait Until Dark, with the Audrey Hepburn, with the blind woman being chased by the criminals in the apartment. Well, it's a slasher. She has to fight this serial killer who has no reason other than he just wants to do what he's doing, and he's chasing her through her house, kind of. And she has she's deaf, so she can't hear anything, obviously. It's very well done. Very well done.
So a couple that I have. How many guys watch South Korean horror films?
Sure.
Sure,
Yeah. Yep.
So one of the things, because I'm going to talk about a South Korean horror film, and if you've watched a few, then you kind of get that there's a weirdness to them, that a lot of times they have these moments that are like comedy, and you're going, what in the heck are you doing with this weird slapstick comedy happening in the middle of this horrifying thing? The Host is one that comes to mind very quickly.
Yep.
And I really love that film, but there's a moment where it nearly topples on itself because at the daughter's funeral, where everybody's like rolling on top of each other, trying to out-grief each other. And the movie that I saw recently, watch it all the way through, and it's one that has a running time to it. It's over 2 hours long. It's called The Wailing. Okay. And it's about, well, I don't know. It could be about a possession. It could be about a disease. Could be about madness. It could be all those things at once. But it has that same weirdness to it where there are moments that are just sheer comedy in the film. But by the end of the movie, the tone continues to darken and darken and darken and darken. And by the end, I had that feeling that I had at the end of We Are What We Are.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
It has a real spiral to it.
What?
At the sound of the dinging cat.
I had just taken my mic off of mute, and then I get...
It was Jonesy. You have Jonesy.
So one that I saw earlier this year at Wisconsin Film Festival is a movie called The Blackcoat's Daughter.
Don't know that.
It was originally called
I heard about
February, about a year ago. Oh, it is very good. It's a slow burn, for sure. But basically, there's this Catholic private school for girls, and there's a freshman there and another girl who are waiting for their parents to come pick them up for Christmas break. And the parents aren't showing up, and they're not showing up, and just kind of, what girls do to pass the time. They kind of start to get to know each other, but it's very clear that something odd is happening. They start talking about satanic things that they heard that had happened at the school, and then you start seeing some kind of a figure around in different scenes, and this just kind of this slow building dread. And there's another parallel storyline of another girl who's trying to get to the school, and it all kind of comes together as the tension mounts, in the last 20 minutes or so are pretty intense, and it certainly leaves a lot to think about. But I would highly recommend that one as well.
I've heard good things about that. That was Oz Perkins did that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's his first director.
Yeah. Cool.
I don't know that one, so I'm excited. It sounds really good.
I don't think it's got a release yet.
Don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it was on VOD earlier this year, but
yeah, I think it's coming.
all I know.
Excellent. Anybody else?
I saw Tim mentioned in the chat The Witch came out this last year.
Yeah.
Love The Witch.
Is that one overrated or?
That's what I was going to ask. Are you saying overrated?
Well, no, because it seems like it's a very polarizing film where everyone I talk to either loves it or hates it. So I was curious what your guys' thoughts were.
Excellent.
Because I personally love it. I mean, I thought it was great for modern day horror, just the atmosphere that it built and the tension, and just it managed to do a lot with very little. And it was really refreshing to me. I really enjoyed it. But I've talked to people that are way into horror movies that really didn't like it. They said it was boring and they couldn't follow the dialogue and everything. So
I know what I saw in the theaters, and I went with a bunch of people, and I don't think I had the right experience for it because we can feel a crowd turn on a film. They did it, and so people were. You could hear the rustling in the chairs, and people were talking back to the screen, and then by the time it's over, you could tell that they were not happy, and I think that whole mood kind of overshadowed how I felt about it because I had trouble understanding the main character a lot, and I also think the sound in the theater was too low, and for his grumbling kind of gravelly voice with that accent on top of it, it made it hard for me to hear what they were saying. But I did like what I saw, and I thought there was such precision of filmmaking involved in that I admired it, and I can't wait to see what this guy does next. So I did watch it again, and I watched it with subtitles on, just so I thought it would help me. And I appreciate it a little bit more, and I do like the film overall. I was very down on it at first, but I've turned on it a bit to come up to appreciate it. I think it's a well-made film.
Mm-hmm.
And whoever cast that goat is brilliant.
Yeah.
Black film.
Ever seen.
Yeah. I really liked it, and I realized that it was, and that would be one that I would put with The Shining in actually being able to successfully do that stretch. Like, there's nothing scary about opening up a barn and seeing a rabbit there. However, he built that up to be able to work. Now, I know people who watched it and went, "There's just a rabbit there.
Right.
What the hell is this?" You know? And I don't know if it's that they don't read film the way that I read film, or they're not feeling film like I feel it, but the natural light in that film actually helped it out a lot. that photography being relatively low light, almost everything's at magic hour, really helped get me into that feeling of the woods, and got me on off of being eased. Now, I know people who watched it and they didn't see anything supernatural in it. So there's outside of, you see the end, but is that her madness or not? They saw it as just somebody, a house falling apart. This is what happens to a family that decides it wants to go off the grid. And I thought that was an interesting way to look at it as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, I would agree with that.
I feel like the trailer sold it a little incorrectly too. The trailer, I think, made it seem like it was more shocking and more traditionally set up like a horror movie than it ended up being, and so people were a little fooled.
Right. I also think it's tremendously acted by the kids. The young boy, when he's dying, is unbelievable.
Yeah, and then the two little twins that are just creepy as hell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, they're the worst.
Yeah, there's The Shining again. Creepy twins.
And that movie also had, in addition to the advertising, the build-up from all the websites and the festival reviews. You get that frenzy of people telling you a year ahead of time how great this film is, and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting until you finally see it, and then it kind of, lands there, and you're like, well, maybe my expectations were somewhere else.
Yeah, I almost find it's best to not look into a movie as much as possible. Like if someone recommends something, I'll just watch it without looking anything up, because the more you read into it, the more you hear about it, it just builds up your expectations, and it's hard to live up to that.
Yeah, it's a very saturated.
The Monster just came out, and I didn't even know that was a thing until like 2 weeks ago.
Right.
So that's another of those movies that I don't know what people were saying about it. I didn't even bother watching a trailer. I just went and saw it and had no expectations going into it, and that was a decent movie. Yeah,
that's the guy who did The Strangers. It's his second film.
Oh, right.
Yeah. What do you guys think of The Strangers? I actually like that movie a lot, and I know that's another one that splits people.
I love it.
I enjoyed it, yeah.
Another one that's...
I think it's okay.
Yeah, I think overall it was effective. It had some effective scenes, but it wasn't like a home run for me.
Because it was a remake, right, of Ills? It was like Swedish movie or something?
I don't think it's a remake.
I'm not... Yeah,
it is. I believe it is a loose remake of the French movie. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know there was them or they was
right.
Yeah. I just think it was. Yeah, it was a run.
Yeah, because there's that foreign movie where they break inside the house, they start torturing the family, but it's a slightly different ending. And that was one where I saw The Strangers first and really liked it, and then I saw that Ills, which is supposed to be the original, and also liked it, but I almost thought if it was a remake, I enjoyed that more than the original, which to me is really rare when it comes to horror movies. So I should probably double check.
According to Wikipedia, it was based on the director's own personal experiences.
Oh, okay.
Which is actually really scary.
Yeah. Well, it probably was that first scene where they open up the door and the person goes, "Is John there?" No, and then hangs. Boy, that was weird. I'm going to write a movie about that based on actual experience. But I thought that was a very good movie in suspense, really using sound and time as well as what you're seeing. And so I gave it pretty high marks. But yes, there's a couple movies. I won't monopolize things here. Continue.
There's, going along that lines, in that era, I guess somebody someday will sit down and write about the mid-2000s horror and analyze it and what it means to the culture. But the movie Funny Games, another movie about home
Michael
invasion,
Hanke.
where he remade his own film in English. And I watched that film, and talk about a film that gave me a reaction. I was very angry when I watched that movie. It was hitting my buttons in a way that I no other film has hit at that time.
No, it was bold, and it was. I felt angry, insulted, like he was mocking me at certain points in that film. And now that worked, and yet the same, not Michael Hanke, but he did the same movie in English as well as in its original Austrian, I think. But there was also a movie back in the 90s. It was I think it was in the 90s. That was one of my favorites as a foreign film. Was remade by the same director in America, and it sucked. It was called The Vanishing.
Yes.
Spoilers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The original Vanishing. Oh my God, what a
the
great
American
film.
version was not
For sure.
not so good.
No, and it's almost the exact same film, and I think it has something to do with, Jeff Bridges and these actors, but there was something about not knowing those people that were in that film, and just the ability to, I didn't know the roads, I didn't know what things looked like. I felt a little lost, and it just worked so well.
Right. Well, and also, the whole movie, Jeff Bridges kind of sounds like he's chewing on a potato when he talks. So that really kind of like, you couldn't take him seriously when he's over-explaining everything. You're like, oh, okay, all right.
That's good.
Have you guys seen In Fear? Irish film.
I don't think I have.
No.
Give it a shot. Since we're talking about things like The Strangers and The Vanishing, a little bit of funny games maybe doused in there. It's an Irish film about two people who are trying to find a bed and breakfast, and they're just going down these winding roads. And I don't want to give a lot of it away, but one of the things that's somewhat revolutionary on that film is that there were parts of it that were thoroughly improvised the moment the camera went on. And so it adds to, I think, people's reactions in some of the sequences. But it's a really interesting slow burn kind of that idea of being lost and maybe somebody's there, maybe somebody's not, really, really works. Kind of like The Monster, except there really was a monster in The Monster. But there, that whole thing of kind of being alone in the environment and the elements, and you're on something that's public transportation, but it doesn't really matter because you can't find your way out.
All right. I'm making a list here.
Anyway, I do want to thank you guys for giving me so much of your time, and I hope you enjoyed yourself, because this really was just wanting to have conversations with the people who are listening, because you're the people that really make this worth doing.
Yeah,
Well, thank
absolutely.
you
It's
for
a
having
pleasure.
us. Shoot.
Pleasure
Yeah,
to
thank you
meet you
very
guys
much.
and talk to you.
Oh.
It's a great time.
Yeah, not a problem at all. Thank you to Dan and Doug and Kris and Tim. And we'll have some information on those guys at the end of this podcast. And I want to thank everybody who's been listening, and to all of you, stay hellbent. And thanks for listening to my show. I'd love to hear back from you. You can email me directly at scott@hellbentforhorror.com. And I've also updated my Hellbent for Horror website, hellbentforhorror.com. You can download every episode directly from there, read any newsletters, and you can go to any of my social websites and emails, all from the homepage. You can IM me on my Facebook page at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and you can find me on Twitter at hellbenthorror. A lot of the great conversations I have with fans happens on Twitter at hellbenthorror. Now, for you, the listeners of Hellbent for Horror, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/hellbentforhorror. If you like the show and you're curious about audiobooks, sign up for the service through Hellbent for Horror. It helps make this podcast sustainable for me. I thank you in advance. And thank you for listening, folks. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can now subscribe to the Hellbent for Horror podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Player FM, and Stitcher. And if you like the show, please consider writing a review on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. It really helps. Till next time, stay hellbent.